If you could state your name and company, please.
Hello, my name is Bukola. I work with Africa Masters Limited. We're a political risk advisory firm. And my question is to the Honorable Cabinet Minister from Rwanda. With a lot of African governments, we see investors come in, and when there's a change in government, all the promises, all the contracts, everything basically starts from scratch. So what I would like to know is what your government does to ensure that there are safeguarding policies for investors who come in if there is a change of government.
Thank you. Africa Matters. Give my regards to Lady Linda Choka, good friend. What we have done in Rwanda is, in our mining legislation, we try and legislate principles. What makes a lot of governments change legislation is that sometimes they get into too much detail into the legislation. And as time changes, the circumstances change as well, and they find it necessary to go back into the law to change. What we have done is we have legislated the main principles, and the details that are operational are left into the regulations that guide the industry. With the regulations, it becomes a lot more practical to work with industry players when circumstances change, when it's desirable to tweak the operational details in the sector to work with them. But for the long term, you leave the legislation stable so that the necessity for continuously touching the law and influencing it and changing it becomes unnecessary. The second thing is creating an awareness, a political awareness. A lot of changes in law are influenced by the resource nationalism sentiments, which is cyclical depending on the market, and the perception that sometimes resources are not being, or windfalls are not being adequately shared, should be understood so that the sector, the way the mining sector works, is understood, both especially by parliamentarians, because they're the ones who tend to ride on the emotions of the population, perhaps more than the executive. So in our work, we are continuously working with stakeholders to educate them, to make them understand the realities of the mining sector, the capital requirements, the compliance requirements, the benefits and the limitations of the windfalls. Also to understand the cycles in the commodity market. All these things help the various stakeholders to have aligned expectations so that the sentiments that are driven by expectations of windfalls are minimal. Thank you.
Yes, same table.
Hello, Tarek Shirley from Amazon Resources. Just interested in Rwanda as a landlocked country. What are the major marketing and logistical challenges that you're seeing, and how are you sort of facing those in the mining sector?
It's true. Oh, this was for James. Okay, we can answer the both. It's true. Rwanda is closest access to the port is 1,500 kilometers port of Dar es Salaam. But and that means a lot of exports have to be shipped that length. But the good thing is that it's within the East African community, so the shipment is seamless across a single highway from wherever it's coming from in Rwanda to the port. The second thing is that as members of the East African community, there are no tariffs on the road for shipment and all that. But because of the compact nature of Rwanda also, internally in the country, we have a very good infrastructure network for roads and electricity and all that. And that facilitates access to all the other power and water-related infrastructure for processing purposes. So I don't find it necessarily a major issue. I think some larger countries which have parts of the countries which touch the coast may necessarily face more difficult infrastructure and logistical challenges than Rwanda, which has neighbors that touch the coast. But I'll let James speak from the operational perspective as well.
Thanks, Francis. So from a marketing perspective, exactly as the CEO says, we have the off-taker comes and takes our product by truck from the gate, the mine gate, and it goes straight down the main road to the port through Tanzania. And in the last 2 years of doing that, we've not had a single problem. So the distance is what it is, but certainly not a challenge to our business. Our small plant and the power into our fledgling mines is straight on the grid. We in the middle of rural Rwanda, about an hour outside of Kigali, and we're on the grid and paying very reasonable power costs. Water is easily available, and we've got a license for that. We've got a large lake just to the north of us. So all of those basics in terms of infrastructure are not a challenge for us right now.
Thank you, James and Honourable Minister. Yes, gentleman over there, please.
Christopher Hilby from Legend Peter. It's a question for the Rwandan government. What is the plan for the people that were involved in previous artisanal mining? Or how are we bringing them into the new paradigm?
Okay, I'll speak from my perspective, and I'll let James also tell you how they are handling it. It's true, we have had a history of predominance of small artisanal miners operating in the sector. And the policy and strategy is to transform a mining sector so that we can have a more professional, commercial, industrial mining industry. However, given the background, we have created the safe space for the small and artisanal miners. And in our legislation, we have a small license regime, and we have a medium license regime. The small license regime is exclusively for the local, previously artisanal miners. However, being small does not give people a license to mine carelessly. We believe that even small miners can do it professionally, can do it complying with the health and safety requirements as well as the environmental requirements. The medium level licensing regime is for partnership between the small, previously artisanal miners with international capital, so that you have this hybrid that is industrial as well as artisanal. What we believe is important is that for every mining license to have the minimum compliance standards, even if it is small or large. You will notice one thing in our mining jurisdiction, that we no longer have a license called artisanal, for one reason, that for a long time people have taken the description of a license known as artisanal as a license to mine wastefully. We believe that people can have a small mining license to operate and yet still do it properly. So we don't have any of the unlicensed operators. We have formalized all licensing, including those who are small, so that the illegal, non-licensed operators who tend to be careless about the health, safety and environmental standards get completely formalized and meet the standards. There is a hybrid of all these, which is where James can come in to explain how they are handling this.
Yeah, so we've been on this journey for 2-3 years and continue on the journey. Our first step, and this is before even having understanding what the resource might look like in the future, was to harness these people who were essentially subsistence mining on our concession, harness those into formal cooperatives, which gave us direct supervision over them, but it was still an informal approach, I guess, to mining, but trying to do it properly, as the CEO has explained. And that worked well, but especially on safety, when you've got huge numbers, big numbers of people, even having that one step removed between the company, then the cooperative, and then the worker, was not. Well, it still presented a challenge for us with a large group of a large number of people, and that's why. And I skipped over it quite briefly, but it really is an integral part of what we're doing right now. So we brought, as I say, nearly 900 people in as employees, and so now they get their pay slip at the end of the month, and as I said earlier, pay their taxes and pay their social security. And also importantly, as an artisanal miner, your objective, your purpose each day is just production. You change that person to employment, you're giving them at least a base salary that they know they're going to go home with at the end of every week or the end of every month to support the family. Yes, you can add bonuses for production and for good safety reporting, and one has to be careful how one incentivizes all of those things, but we're changing that dynamic, that you're not just chasing a production at all costs, in what was a previously not or unsafe environment. And so that's the journey we're on. It's a bold move because as we increase productivity and efficiency in these mines, I believe that we'll take those people and they'll be spread into an ever-expanding operation. But from a safety perspective, from a working with a community perspective, it's, as I say, central to everything we do.
Let me add something else. As we conduct professional exploration work, like what we are doing with SRK, a lot of focus is also on areas that previously have been mined by artisanal miners. And so what we are doing is, as we increase the knowledge of the potential of these areas, we are zoning some of these areas and consolidating them into larger concession areas. And it's what we are promoting now to the investment community, to consolidate larger areas who can then come in and acquire these concessions. Let me tell you this, we've been consulting with many of these artisanal miners. They are very happy just earn a salary because all of them go in looking for a livelihood at the high risk of their lives. So when you get a strategic investor that is seeing the potential there, they're just happy. There's no resistance because of the high cost to their potential loss of lives, continue to do it this way.
Taking on all of those people, we had no resistance at all. People were very happy to, in fact, more than happy, overjoyed to get a formal job.
Thank you. Ollie, tell us a bit about just going back to kind of the exploration side of things and the work that SRK did there. What was the kind of parameters of that, and how do you kind of envisage the uptick in interest as a result of having conducted the kind of piece of work that you guys have done there, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the parameters we were set were quite strict in that a number of pre-selected targets were chosen for us to go and review. And RMB had done some groundwork to select those targets, and they'd identified those as potential targets that, with a bit of backing from a company like SRK, they could take those results that we produced and put them on the market, or at least give them to investors, with a bit of backing and the proper data behind, so they could take those up and actually review what's on the ground and see that quality work had been done. I know that you've had a number of potential investors that have been interested in some of those properties, and there's still, it's very early stages, and there's still a lot of work to be done on those areas, but also in the regions. And, a couple of those more prospective projects are going to sort of bring in interest for the whole region, really. They're not just isolated on their own.
Some more questions from our lovely audience. Okay, well, may I ask one final concluding question, if possible, which is, I think, looking at Africa as a continent, obviously, and Rwanda's kind of, emergence as one of the most exciting countries for investment, actually, in Africa now. What's been the kind of motivation, what's kind of pushed this into mining specifically, is from a kind of governmental perspective? What's the momentum that's kind of driving that forward, and do you kind of see that, how do you see that kind of developing in the sort of, years to come, basically?
So many people in this room may be familiar with the Africa Mining Vision. So about 10 years ago, African Union came together and they were discussing how can the African continent mobilize resources for development, basically. And so the mining vision for Africa was born, which has two things. One, if Africa is going to mobilize domestic resources for development, we need to leverage the resources that we have. And natural resources were seen as a potential source of these resources. Number two, it was also seen as a potential sector that can have linkages to other sectors for industrialization and development. And Rwanda is at the forefront of regional integration and participates actively in many of these discussions at the continental level. And so at the regional level, where we sit in Eastern Central Africa, it's a highly mineralized region. Some of you may be also familiar with the American Dodd-Frank law about conflict minerals of DRC and the neighboring countries. All these things pushed the narrative about minerals in our region as a bad thing. And yet, this can be a good thing for development. And so as a country, Rwanda, we took two steps. One, we took the first step, which was to establish a mineral traceability program that can trace our minerals from the mine to the aggregators who are the exporters, and then send tagged minerals to the international refineries. This safe pipeline has been now operational for the last 10 years, and so Rwanda's minerals and minerals in our region can safely reach the international market, conflict-free, and contribute to development. The second thing is, over the last 10 years, we have witnessed the increase in many of these minerals contributing to export revenues. And as we participated in the Africa Mining Vision, we wanted to make it a viable program and carry out professional mining activities, well regulated as a business sector. And so that's why we worked on the proper exploration, because much of Africa, even some of the known mining countries, very little goes into exploration budgets every year. So the government of Rwanda commits a specific budget every year from our own treasury for carrying out exploration so that we can break through in the knowledge about the geological endowments of our country and leverage those minerals then to get proper revenues to contribute to development. We think that at the regional level, there is a conversation also happening to establish value addition. Currently in Rwanda, we have 3 refineries operating, 114, and one for tantalum that is in the pipeline of construction, and the refinery for gold. We think that there is opportunity for additional processing of our minerals so we can reach the Africa Mining Vision aspiration.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a fantastic session. I'd like to thank all our panelists, including His Honourable Minister. And yes, I think this is clear that this is what happens when you really have political will and motivation to really open up the sector. So I look forward to seeing Rwanda really kind of emerge on the international mining scene in the years to come. Please thank me in joining our panelists.